Yeah, hello everyone. I am Varun from Aspire Systems, and I will be the host for today's webinar, Mobile, Cloud and Agile, Wearing the QA Head's Hat. The webinar agenda has two parts. In this first part, we will do an analysis about the various trends like cloud, agile, and mobile and its impact in QA process and methodologies. In the second part, we will cover the tips and tricks in implementing those trends in the current software QA process. All attendees will be in the mute position, and at any point of time, you can type the questions in the right side of the question panel, and it will be answered by the speakers at the end of the session. Now, I'd be glad to introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker is Paul Gerard, Principal at Gerard Consulting. He played various roles as consultant, author, programmer, tester, and conference speaker. Paul is a veteran in QA space, and he presented a variety of keynote talks and tutorials at testing conferences across Europe, USA, Australia, and South Africa. Our second speaker, Vasu Swaminathan, heads 200 plus independent testing services delivery unit at Aspire Systems. He has 13 plus years of experience in software testing that includes functional performance and test automation. He was instrumental in designing Aspire's test maturity index tool for customers to assess test process measurement. So now I would like to hand over the session to Paul now, and he can take it forward. Paul, over to you.
Okay.
I'll just provide the control to you, Paul.
Right. Okay. It's good like that. Okay, so you can see my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Are you all set? Okay, there we go. What I want to talk about for the next 25 minutes or so is changes in the way that testing, the testing industry, and the disciplines that we call testing seem to be moving on and making quite a change. The change isn't going to be overnight, but the pressures are there. And some companies have already made that change, but it remains for the rest of us to kind of catch up. And so what I want to talk about are some themes about some drivers which are pushing testing in a certain direction. And the theme really I want to sort of cover this morning is to do with the changes in the IT industry in our business demand a rethink of where testing fits in systems projects. So, in effect, one driver is the software as a service dominates the growth of public cloud markets. And let me explain where I'm coming from, and I'll talk a little bit about mobile and then look at some opportunities and threats, if you like, some challenges. So, okay, let me start with this idea of technology and hype. And I'm sure if we were in a room together, and a show of hands, if I asked, how many people have heard of the cloud? Everyone's heard of the cloud. How many people have heard of, mobile applications and the transition there? These innovations, I want to suggest that there's an awful lot of hype out there. And just to sort of set the context, this is a kind of a picture you've probably seen before, and it's a description of how innovations are kind of introduced to a market and are adopted by a very small number of people on the left-hand side. The innovators, the real sort of leading edge or bleeding edge, as you might call it. These individuals and companies are risk takers, want to get an edge on their competitors, are welcoming to new technology and looking for opportunities to make progress. Of course, as innovations, as new technologies, as new approaches, as new methods are adopted, there's an increasing take-up by early adopters, and then you could say the early majority, moving from left to right. The early majority are the people who they are used to adopting technology, but not in the first pass. So they might sort of watch the market for a year or 2 years before they jump in and take on these kind of new approaches and technologies. Then you have the conservatives who are kind of A bit slow to get started, so more conservative kind of industries perhaps, they're followers rather than leaders. And then you have the late market, the people who are pushed into it, the laggards, those folk who really resist change but only move when they see that everybody else has moved and they're almost alone. They're left with the technologies that are becoming obsolete. So the late market. So you can see there's this kind of hype cycle, if you like. So let me move on. A serious question that all innovators have, and a serious challenge that all innovators have, is that they must get beyond this early adoption kind of stage. And you could say that there's a chasm across which the technologies and methods and approaches that are new to the market, the providers of the suppliers of these services and products and technologies must cross the chasm, and the majority of new innovations do not make it. That is, most startup organizations fail to deliver what they intend to. Most new service and product companies get to a certain stage where they have a product, but it never becomes viable and widely adopted in the marketplace. So this chasm is quite a significant step that certain technologies have to cross in order to become adopted in the mainstream. So not all innovations make it across the chasm, and that's kind of obvious. The question is this, that Agile, the cloud, mobile computing, in terms of innovation, have been around long enough now and have been adopted by enough people now that it seems to have made it across the chasm. So the question really is, where are you in the hype cycle? So let me suggest firstly that if you are an early adopter, it may be that some of the things I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes you've been doing for maybe 1 or 2 years. So maybe you've been in the cloud for a couple of years. Maybe you have mobile applications out there in the market. Maybe you have been agile to a certain degree in a very positive way for several, maybe 10 years, who knows. But not everybody is. So each and every one of you out there are at different stages in the adoption cycle. That's the point. So I can't, when I sort of preach, this is your future, well, it may be some of you are already there in some aspects. So I'm being very general, and it's a very general message that I'm trying to promote at the moment. I'm trying to talk about the industry as a whole. There are pressures which are pushing us forwards with Agile, the cloud, and mobile. Agile, for example, has been around perhaps for 10, 12, 14 years maybe, but only just are organizations beginning to get to grips with it at scale. And that's sort of a major point. Only just are larger organizations beginning to take the cloud seriously and are beginning to tackle the challenges of performance and security and so on. Only just are the number of devices out there sufficient to justify development of some applications, electronic wallets and the security and issues around that. Only just are banks beginning to get into that space. So it's a challenging period, and it's an exciting period, of course it is. Another dimension to this is really the use of software and platform and infrastructure as a service. This is a graph from Forrester, and it's a year old now, I guess. But I don't think the conclusions from the graph are kind of changed. And before you think I'm taking this too seriously, I have to say, if you look at the row of software as a service, the second row of numbers to the right, so these guys are predicting to 5 digits of accuracy the value of the software as a service. You can see that software as a service will come to dominate the use of the public cloud. Now, the public cloud is really the infrastructure and storage and processing power that supports things like Google Docs and the Amazon web services and things like that. So this doesn't reflect what organizations are doing internally in private clouds. More, this is the growth of the use of software out there. Now, much of this software as a service will be based on mobile devices and downloaded to mobile devices. So I just want to suggest that software as a service and the opportunities that it presents are driving some of the changes in the marketplace. So, okay, so that's enough of that. Software as a service, dominates. Let me talk about structured versus agile. About 15, 20 years ago, the only game in town was structure analysis, what you might understand as waterfall or staged development. And of course there's been a transition in smaller organizations in particular from structured to agile. So a lot of small companies, a lot of startup organizations, the only way they know how to build software now is in an agile way. But there are other things afoot. The technologies that support the development processes to drive new changes through from an idea in the morning to implemented software in the afternoon. The technologies and the approaches are beginning to emerge and beginning to stabilize to allow organizations at a small scale to do this, but also to adopt these things on a large scale in a larger business, say a bank. The pressure to deliver quickly is it's unchallenged. It's non-stop. There's data which suggests that the half-life of requirements used to be 2 years. Then it was sort of 5 years ago, I think, down to 6 months. Now it could be weeks or days. The pressure to change dramatically, rapidly, to follow changes in the market, to drive changes in the market as a business, mean that the pressure to deliver quickly has never been as hard. Now, that's kind of the good news and exciting news, but the bad news is that if you look out there and what's happening in the marketplace and follow the agile initiatives that are out there, there must be, I think, 20 different forms of something-driven development. So there's behavior-driven development, like test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, business-driven development. There are about 20 of these combinations of permutations, which is fantastically dynamic. There's an awful lot going on out there, but it's also fantastically confusing. So there has to be some consolidation in these agile approaches in order for corporates, for example, to adopt them and implement them. Now, I don't know whether the Japanese influence over agile is going to continue, in that you see lean and Kanban and all sorts of Japanese-sounding things happening now. So I don't know what this consolidated, this transition, this final version of the approach that we should follow, this hybrid agile structured process, I don't know what it could be. And so I invented some of the Kanban, Ichi-Wichi, Hoki-Koki, Kamikaze-driven development. I don't know, and I don't care what it's going to be called, but watch this space. It's changing weekly. The pressures to deliver and the number of people who are trying to innovate in this space in terms of approaches and software technologies is so high that this time next year, certainly my talk here will be out of date. It's moving that fast. The biggest challenge for corporates is that how do they adopt agile approaches to delivery, that is, delivering software quickly, with their business, which can generate and manage and assure progress through business change. They can only do that slowly. So whereas it might take 2 years to arrive at a set of requirements, the process of delivery might be days or even hours potentially. How do bigger businesses, non-agile businesses, connect to an agile delivery process? So I think ultimately there's some kind of hybrid agile structured process, which might be structured analysis, agile delivery, I don't know, call it SAD, call it what you like. The industry is moving in that direction. There are too many smart people out there in the software development space saying that test-driven, behavior-driven, specification by example, these approaches are the way to go. So the IT development community are moving in that direction. We as testers have to move in that direction, of course, to follow. So do businesses. And it's the businesses that need to be comfortable that we are moving in the right direction. So one aspect to this rapid delivery is a phrase that you'll hear more and more of, I'm sure, in the years to come, is continuous delivery. So in the graphic here, we have at the top sort of a staged delivery process where the number of stages is relatively small, 2, 3, 4. The period over which these releases are implemented, maybe 1 or 2 years, perhaps delivered every 3, 4, 5, 6 months. That kind of scale thing, that kind of traditional delivery model is being transformed into what's being called most commonly continuous delivery. So the notion of delivery now becomes, let us instigate a change today, perhaps design the code this afternoon, implement the code tomorrow morning, test the code tomorrow afternoon, go live tomorrow evening. the potential is now there for some of the agile approaches that if you can feed requirements in a systematic way to an agile team who are into continuous delivery and continuous testing, then perhaps you can deliver code in a very rapid sequence. Now, inevitably, this suits the mobile world and the cloud-based application and the software as a service kind of delivery mechanism much better. We want to deliver bug fixes, sure. We want to deliver more functionality, continuous evolution. We want to do it on a continuous basis. So if a development team are to deliver continuously, there are two things required. One is beyond their own processes. One is high quality requirements coming into that process and very rapid testing, continuous testing, a lot of automation happening during and after the development in order to deliver promptly. So these are the pressures, to have better requirements and better continuous testing in the development process to support this flow of features into production. So let me talk about mobile for a moment. And the mobile space seems to be moving faster than any other technology transition we've had over the years. I honestly think that the transition to mobile applications, the mobile web, if you like, is more significant than the transition from mainframes to PCs, GUIs, client-server, and obviously the Internet itself. The challenges we face are, although these devices are small and handheld, and although some of the applications might be sold for $2 or $3, the sophistication of the technology and the sheer complexity of the software has introduced all kinds of new risks that we have to worry about, particularly as testers. So we have multiple inputs to our devices. We have touch screens, there are gestures coming on. We have to sync with other devices and connected PCs and corporate services. There are various peripherals we can add to our phone. We have to deal with application stores and the whole networking idea of working, collaborating between mobile devices. It's all kind of new to us. The location and movement of devices affects their behavior. So our mobile application may be built in the UK or India or the USA or South America, but it might be used anywhere on the planet that has a network and beyond those places. The physical movement of the phone, where the device moves across cells in a mobile phone network, or where the phone is in use at home perhaps, where the signal for the mobile network might be very low, but your local Wi-Fi takes over. These transitions are really significant. And not only that, the physical phone itself can detect movement. So the phones themselves, as they are shaken and stirred, that might affect your functionality too. Rather than just a keyboard, a mouse, and a screen with essentially text and movements and commands driven by button clicks, there are multiple communication formats now. These mobile devices can send texts, they can send emails, instant messaging, voicemail, video, who knows what else. And some of the applications being developed now are using 2 or 3 or 4 of these different formats at once. Phones themselves come in all shapes and sizes, and the layout and presentation of content on mobile devices is quite a challenge, because very simplistic applications, maybe there's no problem, but more and more the pressure is to create more sophisticated applications, so we need more sophisticated devices and very high quality ergonomic and usability design. So I don't know whether mobile phones and the small handheld kind of mobile phones, or whether the tablet device is going to take off, or whether we'll be using wearable computers, who knows. The challenge of ergonomics and usability have never been greater, and yet we have to provide functionality that perhaps works on all these different platforms. And of course, your application might be dedicated to an iPhone, sure, but it might be a generic application. It might be a web a web application which has to run on many, many devices. Of course, we've got the configurations and different devices and versions and operating systems and the whole complexity of platform testing. Now, my view here is that if all the development in all the devices in the world stopped now, we'd probably catch up in a few years. But there's no way this situation seems to be getting easier. It seems likely that we're going to have this challenge, an increasing challenge over the next few years. It's going to get more and more difficult to keep pace. The developers are going to have a whale of a time, but the testers are going to struggle to be able to keep pace with this. So in order to keep pace, we have to have an agile with a little a approach to continuous test strategy. We need to focus on what the goals of applications are, and we need to pay much attention to the risks, the functional and the non-functional risks of deployment and delivery. So the challenge of testing is pretty steep. So what does this mean? Testing is being redistributed. That is, there's going to be more upfront testing to get requirements of higher quality. There's going to be more testing done by developers, probably fully automated. There's going to be more emphasis on very quick, rapid, unscripted testing done in minutes or hours rather than weeks or months. There'll be a focus on continuous test and assurance. It's not we test at the end, we test continuously from requirements to designs to code through integration and non-functional as well. You could say that service integration replaces system integration. We're not going to look at software in particular. We're going to be looking at services supported by software. So hardware and infrastructure with people and geographies and buildings and controlled devices. Anything within a power supply could become a mobile device. So the way to look at this is not to look at it as a software testing discipline anymore. It's almost we test systems, and the system could be an electric shaver or it could be an airport and anything in between. Non-functional skills are going to be in demand, and that's been increasing over the years and will not stop. And there's also a notion of the choices to be made. Devices must be secure, but to make things secure we tend to have to compromise on usability. There are some really interesting trade-offs that have to be made, and testing has to follow that. What I want to say, this slide here reflects some board-level messages, and you can tell the language is a board-level kind of statement, this wider resource orchestration. This isn't one of my slides, it's one from a friend of mine who consults to CEOs. His argument is this: the creation and delivery of systems with assurance calls for new approaches to development and testing. That's clear. It's across the life cycle, for sure, and it's increasingly in the virtual. We're increasingly moving towards the cloud because the economics is driving us in that direction. Now you could argue that actually what this means is board-level people are now thinking in terms of testing through the life cycle. This is an old message, but with the pressures that we now have, that message is being heard at a very senior level. So we're getting attention at last for testing at high level. So I want to close with some suggested changes that are coming, and I'm going to do this very quickly just to trigger some thoughts at your end. But I've said we need to get better requirements in order to feed this beast, which we could call continuous development and deployment and delivery. We have to have better requirements. So testing must be involved upstream to validate requirements before there is a commitment to deploy them. So business test planning should become part of analysis and design, where it should always have been. Specification by example is a catch-all term covering acceptance test-driven, behavior-driven, test-driven, and several other kind of disciplines. I think specification by example, where you take content that describes requirements, extract automated test code from that, connect it to the application with your fixtures, your software fixtures, to drive automated testing. I think there's going to be a trend towards specification by example. It's a catch-all phrase, but look out for these almost factory-based processes from requirements through to delivery, day in, day out, day in, day out. Developers will adopt behavior-driven development and new tools. The technology to support behavior-driven development is still pretty basic. It's quite clever, but it's not sophisticated enough for corporates yet. Okay, so to run almost a software development organization to support a business that wants to be agile, you need a very sophisticated set of tools. The tools we have are still perhaps command line driven in terms of their maturity. They really need to step up, but those tools are coming. Some system tests and most acceptance tests will be business model driven. There is not time to analyze hard copy requirements, to come up with tables of test cases, to automate them and to implement them as manual tests. System tests and most acceptance tests will be business model driven but automated. Continuous goal and risk-based strategies will become the norm. We haven't time to sit back and think of how we plan our testing over the next 6 months or a year. We have to be in there and now, moving as quickly as the developers and as quickly as requirements come in. We need our strategies to evolve, to adapt to these new requirements. Continuous test strategy will become the norm. In the mobile space, new test specialisms will emerge. So all these new risks that we have to deal with as testers, these are all very new to us at the moment. I mean, so they've only been around. Some risks have been around for less than 6 months. As the mobile device suppliers innovate, the testers will have new risks to deal with. It's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse and more challenging. Manual system test execution will be outsourced and in the cloud. This is a great generalization. However, we need to treat some testing, what you might call the checking, the manual, rather boring, mundane activities. We need to treat those activities as things that we can outsource or automate, and certainly put these things in the cloud. The pressure is there to do this. And finally, maybe half of all acceptance tests will be automated in a continuous integration environment forever. So again, if you're running in this continuous deployment and delivery mode, the requirements that come into the process are drive requirement all the way through to deployment. So they are accurate. So the requirements are forever. If automation maps to those requirements forever, the whole thing, specification by example, requirements through to code and tests, are consistent for the lifetime of the product. And that's why half of all acceptance tests, maybe more, will be automated in continuous integration forever. So the real squeeze on testing, where I started from, is the pressures on us to move. The real squeeze is from low-value, unskilled, downstream testers working in big teams to upstream, business-savvy, workflow-oriented, user experience-aware testing specialists with new tools. Whereas we've got to reskill and move up the food chain from laggards at the back of the hype cycle up to the front, to get in there with requirements and to support developers and to use automation with real skill and application. So the developers will own some of the checking with automation and take some of the boring stuff away, we hope. Business analysis will own acceptance, so we have to work closely with business analysis. There's a new focus on requirements management because continuous delivery requires high-quality requirements. And I have to say that the underskilled testers with a 3-day course and not much else in terms of experience, relying on clerical skills, I think those guys are under real pressure. So it's a redistribution of testing and not its death, which has been said elsewhere. So that's me done. I think I hand over to Vasu now, and I think you take control, don't you, Vasu? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, thank you, Paul, once again. That was a real good heads up on the new trends that we are experiencing. To move on from there, so basically with these kind of changes coming in, what would be the challenges for a QA head or heads of testing in companies? So some of the ones that have crossed the chasm are there to stay, and such things are expected to come. As we move on, we see that newer trends are emerging every day. So there is always a possibility that there could be newer ones that can get added to the ones that have been already there. And basically, how can QA heads handle them? And does it call for a radical change? When I say that, apart from what we're doing today in terms of testing, what kind of a change is required in terms of approach or in terms of methodology when such kind of newer changes come? Do we need to do a complete turnaround in terms of approach, or what is the balance that we need to have in order to handle such kind of changes? And the key point or the most important point surrounding all this is how do we ensure top quality for customers despite the fact that we have these changes happening, and we are put around a set of a situation where we don't have we don't have a lot of time to basically catch up. There's very limited time available, so we need to train teams, get them going, and make sure that we still ensure a top-class product is delivered to the customer. So as a QA head, these are some of the changes, or these are some of the questions, or these are some of the points that go around in my mind. I'm sure similar people who are heading testing units in organizations also come across these questions sometime when they sit and think about how they can go about handling these changes. So what we're trying to do basically is, we have put together some points around each of these areas, which is basically the cloud, agile, and mobile, in terms of what are the best practices one can do, or what are the key things somebody can take care when it comes to testing. So the answer to these questions can be found there. So to start with, cloud testing. So on the cloud testing area, one thing that is very clear is, there are multiple clients who use similar databases. There are multiple clients who go through similar kind of workflow, but still it is unique for them. So it is very important to ensure that data is demarcated from one customer to another customer, and areas like security testing and performance testing are really taken care of. So to summarize it, basically, we are talking about emphasize more on black box testing. The reason why we are emphasizing more on black box testing here is the need for unit testing, or the need for code coverage and things like that would slightly take a backseat in this case, because from a tester point of view, what is important is the components are integrated together, and basically the tester will have to make sure that he's taking care of the overall picture, which is like when it is for somebody, when it's just for one customer, he is able to view the data only for that particular customer, and when somebody else is trying to log in, it should be specific to that person. So that it's very important to focus on the black box testing part of it, one. And as I said earlier, most importantly, in the case of cloud, there is a lot of need for non-functional testing. So it is important to jot down the requirements in terms of non-functional needs early in the cycle. So it is important to know, what kind of performance testing would be required on the cloud, choosing the appropriate tools for performance testing, what kind of security testing methods need to be, taken care of, what kind of tools should be used for security testing, and things like that. Somewhere down the line, if these requirements are missed, it might be difficult as the product moves on, or it gets enhanced with new features and things like that. So it's important to understand the needs of non-functional requirements early in the cycle. And as I said earlier, one of the most important things is data validation in the case of shared multi-tenants. So naturally, there are hundreds of tenants who are using a hosted service by the provider, and for each one of them, it's a big workflow. It becomes important to make sure that as a tester, that workflow is correctly displayed, and no kind of any outside data is present there, or any data that is specific to this provider or specific to this particular client is not being used or shared somewhere else. So it's important to do data validation when it comes to the cloud. And most importantly, there's a lot of talk around automation in case of cloud and things like that. companies like Sovasta are providing performance and functional testing tools for the cloud environment. So it is important to identify the needs of functional and non-functional testing when it comes to the cloud. So what kind of tool will suit your product, what kind of tool will suit your product's context is extremely important, for which your homework needs to be done before you go about choosing a tool. And finally, it is important to focus on things like workflow-based automation as opposed to standard automation methods like data-driven or anything else. So there might be a need for that, but what I'm saying is the key here is a workflow-based one, which is basically a keyword-driven kind of an approach. So the workflow for each client needs to be automated, and it has to be automated in a way it is expected to test or expected to work. So when it comes to cloud testing, these are some of the key points that QA heads will have to keep in mind and teach the testing teams as they move forward. And on the agile, Paul gave a very good example in terms of how the transition is happening. He spoke about specification by examples, and he very clearly said that developers are going to embrace approaches like behavior-driven development. So on the other side, from a testing aspect per se, what is that testers can do in order to stay in touch with these changes, or make sure that the testing definitely is on top with respect to these changes. So one of the things that testers will have to use is they'll have to practice more of exploratory testing, which is simultaneous learning, test design, and execution. So today we don't have in agile kind of projects, the time that is required or the time that is provided for knowledge transfer is pretty limited, and there is no assigned mentor or somebody who can come and train us. So the job of training is entrusted with the vendor himself. So basically, the vendor needs to plan for training, and training cannot happen for months together. So what kind of an approach can people, or particularly testers, take in order to learn the product, but at the same time, show the client that they are productively contributing, despite the fact that they are getting trained. So to overcome that, the approach that can be followed is exploratory testing, wherein the tester starts doing simultaneous learning, test design, and execution. And there is a lot of hype around automation for agile environments. There are a lot of tools that are being talked about, like Fitnessy, Selenium, and things like that. But I think what is important is to have a very clear strategy for automation. Now, there could be environments in which there are a lot of changes or a lot of user interface elements getting added, removed across sprints, across builds, which might hinder the process of automation. So in such cases, limited automation should be done, and that limited automation should be done in collaboration with development. So it is extremely important to talk to the development team, get some kind of images or what you call as working shots of what they expected, what the upcoming sprint is expected to have. So that kind of image shots can definitely help in planning for automation better. And in today's environment, I don't think there exists a word saying that we won't do automation. I think that's not available today. So there is some level of automation which clients expect. And I think what is important as a vendor, as a tester, is to make sure that we are doing the right level of automation using the right tools. So we don't want it to be shelved at some point of time. So it is important to have a highly collaborative approach with all the stakeholders and make sure that the strategy for automation is very clear. And Paul brought up another valid point where he said continuous integration is there to stay. There will be automated. The automated tests will run in CI environment forever, which is a very valid statement, because as you see more of agile or test-driven development kind of environments today, the first job that people do is they automate the QA. The user acceptance test or the acceptance test, and what they do is, followed by that, they integrate all the tests in the continuous integration environment. So there are tools like Jenkins. There are tools like Maven that can be used in the automation environment for continuous integration. And tools like Jenkins provide a lot of support in terms of creating emailable reports, sending them to the user after the automation is complete, and things like that. So more of such automation or acceptance tests that are automated would be integrated in the CA environment, and that would be the way to follow. That's the way it's going to happen going forward, apart from the regression tests and things like that. So the key point here is testers, who are working in such kind of environments cannot afford to have only, black box testing knowledge. It is important to pick up the right team. So, you need a mix of, white box and black box, where the black box tester complements the white box tester with the story that needs to be automated, and the white box tester in turn works with the black box tester to ensure that he automates the story in a way the black box tester wants it. So the right mix of team is something very critical in this environment. And the test first approach, which is basically test-driven development, where scenarios are created by testers for development teams, and development starts coding around that. This basically increases coverage in terms of testing, and also tries to cover as many scenarios as possible. So the test first approach is something that QA heads will and must practice in environments where agile and development is being used. And finally, so the stories that are being used for automation, or that are being asked to automate, should be understood by the testers well in order to provide the coverage better. So it is important to work very closely with product management teams, understand where the requirement is coming from, what the requirement is expected to do, and what could be the possible scenarios around the requirement and things like that. So testers will have to be thinking out of the box. There needs to be a lot of lateral thinking in order to understand the requirements better and to create scenarios for the development to do coding. So these are some of the areas that QA heads might have to keep an eye on when it comes to agile test-driven development. And particularly with respect to behavior-driven testing, as Paul was pointing out, that specification by example. So smaller stories are being created, and they are written in simple English, and then they are being coded. And Ruby on Rails, Cucumber, JBehave, JRuby, all that are now being used in the behavior-driven testing environment. So behavior-driven testing tries to address some of the gaps in the test-driven development space, and I'm sure we are going to see a lot of behavior-driven testing as we move forward. Finally, on the mobile testing, some of the areas that QA heads will have to keep an eye on when it comes to testing. It's important to create a good test environment matrix, because there are a number of platforms, number of devices for which testing is done today. So there are platforms like Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, Windows, Java, and similarly there are a lot of devices that belong to various companies. And it's always a hybrid approach that most of the companies take, or most of the testers take, where some of the devices are emulated in terms of tools like Device Anywhere, and some of them are directly tested on devices. So it is important to have a test environment keeping in mind what your end customer usage is. For example, if there is a lot of Samsung devices on the Android platform, let's say for example, it's important to make sure that most of the testing is covered on that. In fact, the last point that I have mentioned here, risk-based testing, is based on that. So I basically said risk-based testing can be planned based on the end customer device usage. So it is obviously a little difficult to cover every environment, every device, or every platform and every device. So what can testers smartly do in this case is a risk-based testing approach can be designed where the test environment matrix very clearly says 80% of the devices / platforms belong to this category. So let's do testing on that. And the remaining 20%, we know that very minor defects would come in and things like that. In that way, there is assured coverage from the testers and to the end customer, saying that these are the areas that we have tested in terms of platforms and devices. So we don't expect to see any major issues in this area. Whereas the rest of them, due to lack of time or due to the matrix being too huge, we have not had a chance to test it. But only 2% or 3% of your customers are using these devices or platforms, and hence we should be able to live with that. So that's a very important point to focus on when it comes to testing in the mobile testing space. And again, on the mobile front, there is a lot of automation that is being talked about today. So there are tools like Robotium, there are tools like Miox, there are tools like Selenium and the WebDriver that are being used for automating various platforms. Now, what is important is, it is not required to create one script per device or per platform. So testers will have to sit down, and make sure that one framework that they are creating can encompass a set of devices and platforms. So when they do that, basically they will have to make sure that for this particular device and this platform, I'll have this script run from the automation framework. And similarly, if it is something else, we'll have the other script run. So that kind of intelligence needs to be built within the scripts, and the automation needs to be done based on that part. And there are a lot of other types of testing that is being done in the mobile environment, like installation testing, checking for memory, checking for battery usage, and things like that. So it is important to have a checklist with the various types of testing to be performed. It could be put on the tester's desk, where it says, if it's this device, we'll have to make sure these kind of tests are being done. And if it's this particular platform, these are the tests that we need to do in order to ensure that the platform is working fine. So such kind of a checklist will definitely help in improving test coverage and in ensuring that the quality bar is raised when the final product is delivered. So these are some of the areas that QA heads will have to focus on when it comes to cloud, agile, and the mobile testing area. So finally, to summarize a few things. So one of the key areas, so when we started this second part of this presentation, we said, how can QA heads handle these changes? So one of the answers to that question is, they need to make sure that the team is constantly updated on newer things that come in. I know it is easier said than done, but then it is important to do this. It's important to have what you call like a COE kind of an environment where there are resources who are working on different things that come up, different tools and things like that, so that there are quick answers when there is a need for a solution. So testers need to be constantly updated on newer trends and newer technologies. And the approach to testing doesn't change dramatically, though newer jargons or newer approaches have slightly come in. The fundamental premise remains the same, which is like go for better coverage within the limited time available. So it's always important to ensure that high quality is assured, and in that process, there is a compromise that can be made with respect to lower platforms or platforms that have minimal usage, or operating systems that have minimal usage and things like that. So the approach basically is to see how much of coverage can be increased in a given span of time using various tools and technologies, which is something testers have been following. But what is important is things like ad hoc testing might have to be given up, and in that place, terms like exploratory testing should come up. So an ad hoc becomes totally a freestyle form of testing, where the tester goes and hits the application and tries to see how many defects he's able to find without going through the test cases. Whereas through exploratory testing, he does the same job, but he goes with an organized frame of mind, and he tries to, there are techniques like session-based test management that can help testers accomplish this. So testers will have to take that kind of an approach and do it. So there is no dramatic changes to the old way of testing, but there are some changes that testers needs to adapt in order to handle the testing for such new trends. So and finally, for the QA heads, it is important to have a very clear strategy in place. It is important to guide the team with a strategy that very clearly comes out as the right one for testing a particular product or to test a particular environment. So in order to arrive at that kind of a strategy, there needs to be a lot of questions that should be asked beforehand to product management teams and others, and ensure that the strategy is device based on that. And the strategy again will have to evolve over a period of time to see whether that is the right thing to do for that particular product and things like that. And testers will have to follow the strategy that has been created, so that they are going by an approach where they serve the end customer with as much quality as possible. So having a very clear strategy in place is also important in order to stay in touch with these trends from a testing viewpoint. And finally, automate as much as possible if the need exists. So there is a lot of automation related stuff that we spoke about during this presentation, as well as you might be hearing from a lot of people that you are interacting with. But I think the key is not everything, and or not everything can be automated. So automating everything is a myth. So I don't think that's the way to go forward. There are some areas where testers will have to do a bit of creative analysis, a bit of lateral thinking to make sure they are potentially testing the right scenarios and identifying the right bugs. But at the same time, not everything can be tested manually as well. So it's a fine balance that testers will have to see, and arrive at a strategy wherein like, okay, I want these portions to be automated because I feel these are not going to change. These are the ones that are at a smoke test or an acceptance test level. So even if there is a change to the test or an addition tomorrow, I can still handle it through automation because it's not very huge in size and all that. So basically, testers will have to analyze a few points with respect to the size of the test cases to be automated and the scope of automation and things like that. And finally, put a balance between manual and automation testing in these new trends. So those are some of the areas that I wanted to touch base upon as part of the second innings in this presentation. So that's something which we wanted to share from Aspire. So the table is open for questions.
You can type your questions in the right side panel. It will be addressed by the speakers. Vasu, there is a question for you. What kind of testing would you reckon on mobility testing? Would it be automation or manual, and why?
I think I partially answered that. It's a balance. So I mean, today, as I said earlier, automation cannot be said a no. Because new trends like mobile testing demand a lot of automation more than manual testing. But it depends upon the application, how much of end user base it has got, what kind of a purpose it serves, and things like that. So a combination of all that will help us to arrive at a balance between automation versus manual, and also the time to market and things like. Some of the things that matter to the CIO, CEO level will also help us to take a decision on the automation versus manual for mobiles. I think we have another question here. Name some of the mobile automation test tools. As I said earlier, Robotium is an open source tool, but it works only for Android. On the other hand, Selenium with the WebDriver supports iPhone, Java, and and some more platforms like Windows. Miox is a commercial tool that almost does testing on all the mobile platforms. Miox is a tool from a company called Jamo Solutions, and Miox is used, or Miox can be used to test any platform, though the cost is pretty expensive. There is also another question that is being asked by one of the attendees. What tools are used for agile automation? As I said earlier, Fitnessy is one of the tools that I see very commonly in the agile environment, followed by Selenium. But depending upon the nature of agile that is being done, for example, there are people who do behavior-driven testing, for which tools like Cucumber and Ruby seem to be the most or the best fit, I would say. But in general, Agile, I'm also seeing people using QTP, but again, it's about cost-effective versus non-cost-effective. So Selenium seems to be a very favorable tool for most of the Agile users or Agile practitioners. So I see a lot of tools being done using, I see a lot of automation done using Agile. Can you name, there is another question that says, can you name tools for testing mobile battery consumption? I'm not sure if any automation tool would help you do this. You might want to check out sites like Device Anywhere, where they might want to do a battery consumption test or something of that sort to help you, achieve this. But in general, automation tools may not be useful for testing things like mobile battery consumption.
Okay, we'll have one more question to wind up this session.
There is one more question. Can you suggest some tool for testing the performance for mobile applications? Again, performance for mobile applications, it also depends on the environment that you have. For example, you have a Java-based mobile app. JMeter is a good tool to use. JMeter supports testing, performance testing on mobile applications. In case if you are using a different environment other than Java, you might want to try out tools like Perl, which can help you to do some level of performance testing. But typically, JMeter kind of tools will help you to do performance testing, where you can do a baseline benchmarking and all that, and go about using that. So JMeter is a good option if you are using Java-based mobile application development. For Android and iOS, again, there is a question asked. As I said earlier, Selenium with WebDriver could be a good combination for Android and iOS if you want one tool for both the platforms. And as I said earlier, if you want specific to Android, Robotium is a good choice if it's just Android. But iOS and Android, Selenium with the WebDriver is an excellent choice. We are working with some of our customers using Selenium, and it's kind of very successful, I would say. So it is useful to have Selenium with the WebDriver for Android and iOS.
Okay. So we'll address the rest of the questions by email, and alternatively, you can also send your questions to either Vasu or Paul's email IDs mentioned here. So thank you all for participating in this webinar, and thanks again to Paul and Vasu for conducting this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.